There I am. Hi, Founder fans. Jason here. Sorry about that. I paused my sound and then forgot to turn it back on. Welcome to our read along. We are continuing with William Pierce's sketches of the delegates to the federal constitution. This is our second night of doing this. I'm going to try and do it as often as I can because there's so many thousands of documents to read. I don't have enough lifetime for it. Thank you for joining me on this adventure. Why don't we pop on over to my new screen here. I'll sit to the side. There it goes. I'm a little bit brighter, I realize, because it's popped up there. We're going to talk about the delegates. Now, we did this yesterday, you might remember, where we discussed the first half of these reviews. Again, William Pierce was only at the Constitutional Convention for about a month when he went back to New York to join the Continental Congress and fight a duel, although the duel was avoided by Alexander Hamilton. So, I am over a little bit here. Okay. So, anywhoozle, let's talk about this. So, we are on Maryland, and if you want to see the rest of them, go back to yesterday. But right now, we're on Maryland. We are going to talk about Luther Martin, James, that's J.A.S. is James Mchenry, Daniel of St. Thomas Jennifer, and Daniel Carroll. I want to say right off the bat, Daniel Carroll was one of the Catholic signers of the Constitution, which I don't usually point that kind of thing out. But between him and Thomas Fitzsimmons, being Catholic was now suddenly becoming acceptable. You know, Pennsylvania and Maryland both had a Catholic at the Constitutional Convention. Carroll also, his cousin, Charles Carroll of Carrollton, would sign the Declaration of Independence. And his brother, his younger brother, John Carroll, would be the first Catholic bishop in the history of the United States. So, let's talk about a few of these people. Mr. Martin was educated for the bar and is Attorney General for the state of Maryland. This gentleman possesses a good deal of information, but he has a very bad delivery, and so extremely prolix that he never speaks without tiring the patience of all who hear him. He's about 34 years old. Just to recap, most of the people have been in their 30s who were at the Constitutional Convention. Additionally, William Pierce is very concerned with what kind of orator you are. Are you a good speaker or are you a bad speaker? That is all he seems to care about. Excuse me, Mr. Mchenry. Interesting how he spells Mchenry here. Does he spell it the same way? No, here he spells it right. Down here he adds another period, which is, I don't know, not really noteworthy, but I think it's fascinating. Mr. Mchenry was bred a physician, but he afterwards turned soldier and acted as aide to General Washington and the Marquis de Lafayette. He's a man of specious talents with nothing of genius to improve them. As a politician, there is nothing remarkable in him, nor has he any of the graces of the orator. He is, however, a very respected young gentleman and deserves the honor which his country has bestowed upon him. He is about 32 years of age. Very interesting. You know, if this got out, there'd be a lot of duels challenged to William Pierce because these are kind of mean, most of these. A physician turned soldier. He would later go on to, let me get this right, be Secretary of War for George Washington, and then later Thomas Jefferson. Later John Adams. John Adams continues with most of the leftover. Wow, can't get words out. The cabinet of George Washington. Adams just kind of keeps around for a while. Now, Henry is not as much of a, I don't want to use the term villain, but nuisance to John Adams as Pickering is, but Henry certainly follows Pickering's lead and is fired by John Adams eventually for essentially taking orders from Alexander Hamilton and trying to have a different Federalist replace John Adams as president. Mr. Jennifer, oh, by the way, Daniel of St. Thomas Jennifer, his middle name is of St. Thomas. That's his middle name. It's not like Charles Carroll of Carrollton, who was from Carrollton and was trying to distinguish himself from his cousin, Charles Carroll. No. He's not from St. Thomas. His parents just named him of St. Thomas. I will never get over that. Mr. Jennifer is a gentleman of fortune in Maryland. He is always in good humor and never fails to make his company pleased with him. He sits silent in the Senate and seems to be conscious that he is no politician. From his long continuance in single life, no doubt, but he has made the vow of celibacy. He speaks warmly of the ladies notwithstanding. Mr. Jennifer is about 55 years of age and once served an aide-de-camp to Major General Lee. Oh, excuse me. Yes. So this is very interesting how concerned he is with his vow of celibacy. I don't know of a vow of celibacy. I just know that he was single for his entire adult life. Mr. Carroll. Actually, he's interesting. You know what? I should contact. I don't know if you guys are familiar with. I can't believe I'm forgetting the handle. There's an account. Someone who writes articles about sexuality in the 18th century. I should definitely contact her about Jennifer. Man, I can't. Why can't I not think of the name? I apologize that I can't think of it. Mr. Carroll. Again, Mr. Carroll is one of the big Catholic families of the Revolution. Is a man of large fortune and influence in his state. He possesses plain good sense and is in the full confidence of his countrymen. This gentleman is about not available years of age. I understand he left like an underscore there because he just couldn't figure it out. Very interesting. Plain good sense, super wealthy. Not much to say. Now we're getting to Virginia. He's got a lot to say about Virginia. We have General George Washington, George Wythe, George Mason, James Madison with 2 D's, interesting, Jr., which is interesting. Because James Madison's father's name was also James Madison. And his cousin's name was James Madison. And while James Madison, future president, was writing the Constitution, James Madison, his cousin, was president of the College of William and Mary. So it's not like he was a nobody. His 2 James Madisons running around Virginia in very high levels of society. Technically 3 if you count his father. John Blair, Edmund Randolph, sitting governor of Virginia at this time, and James McClurg. Spells McClurg very interestingly. The way McClurg is usually spelled, no period, M, lowercase c, capital KC, lowercase l. Anyway, let's see what he has to say about George Washalot. General Washington is well known as the commander-in-chief of the late American Army. Having conducted these states to independence and peace, he now appears to assist in framing the government to make the people happy. Like Gustavus Vasa, he may be said to be the deliverer of his country. Like Peter the Great, he appears as the politician and the statesman. And like Cincinnatus, he returned from his farm perfectly contented with being only a plain citizen after enjoying the highest honor of the Confederacy, and now only seeks for the approbation of his countrymen by being virtuous and useful. The general was conducted to the chair as president of the convention by the unanimous vote of its members. He is in the 52nd year of his age. Amazing. I don't know all these references. Gustavus Vasa, I probably should. Peter the Great was, I guess I don't know enough about. Was he Russia? I don't remember. Cincinnatus, I do know. Cincinnatus was the Roman general that Washington modeled himself after. He victoriously won the war and was chosen to be dictator and instead went home. Now, Washington was never chosen to be dictator, but Cincinnatus was, and instead he went home to his farm. And that's who Washington modeled himself after. I don't want to be a dictator. I want to just go home to my farm. Mr. Wythe. Not White, as I mispronounced it for most of my life. Wythe. Despite the E. I always thought the E made it White. Anyway, Mr. Wythe is the famous professor of law at the University of William and Mary. He is confessedly one of our most learned legal characters of the present age. From his close attention to the study of general learning, he has acquired a complete knowledge of the dead languages and all the sciences. He is remarked for his exemplary life and universally esteemed for his good principles. No man is said to understand the history of government better than Mr. Wythe, nor anyone who understands the fluctuating condition to which all societies are liable better than he does. Yet from his too favorable opinion of men, he is no great politician. He is a neat and pleasing speaker and most correct and able writer. Mr. Wythe is about 55 years of age. I called him Wythe again. Mr. Wythe is, he was arguably one of the most respected legal minds in the colonies. He educated Thomas Jefferson. He educated just a whole slew of American founders and a second generation of American politicians in the law, including Henry Clay later in life. Wythe actually dies under really mysterious circumstances. It seems like he was murdered by a nephew who wanted his inheritance. Now, I want to scroll back up to Mr. Wilson of Pennsylvania, if you'll permit me for a second, because he ranked him also among the best political knowledge and also understands the governments of every revolution in the earliest stages of the Commonwealth. So he actually says pretty similar things about Wythe that he says about Wilson. And I feel the same way. I say the same thing. Those two guys, one from Pennsylvania, one from Virginia, are kind of the leading knowers of government. Though Mason is too. Mason, not super famous. Mason was one of the three people with Jerry and Randolph we're about to speak about who were there when the Constitution was signed, standing in the room saying, "No thanks, I won't put my name on that garbage." It's not exactly how they put it, but that's what happened. Mason wrote Virginia's Declaration of Rights, and that the Bill of Rights would later be based on. And that Thomas Jefferson had next to him when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Mr. Mason is a gentleman of remarkable strong powers and possesses a clear and copious understanding. He is able and convincing in debate, steady and firm in his principles, and undoubtedly one of the best politicians in America. Mr. Mason is about 60 years old with a fine, strong constitution. I'll remind you, when he says constitution here, he means like their health and well-being, and he seems to like to say that to people who are old. Mr. Madison, James Madison. Spelled with too many D's. Excuse me. Got myself a tickle. Technically, the third video I'm making in about 4 hours. Excuse me. Anyway, now that I've ruined the video, Mr. Madison. Mr. Madison is a character who has long been in public life. And what is very remarkable, every person seems to acknowledge his greatness. He blends together the profound politician with the scholar. In the management of every great question, he evidently took the lead in the convention. And though he cannot be called an orator, he is a most agreeable, eloquent, and convincing speaker. From a spirit of industry and application which he possesses in a most eminent degree, he always comes forward the best informed of any man in the Union. He has been twice a member of Congress and was always thought one of the ablest members that ever sat in that council. Mr. Madison is about 37 years of age, a gentleman of great modesty, with a remarkably sweet temper. He is easy and unreserved among his acquaintance, and has a most agreeable style of conversation. Well, as someone who is also 37 years old and not writing the United States Constitution, that sure makes me feel like garbage. But, that being said, a character who's long in public, it's interesting what he says about him being an orator. Like I said, Pierce really is concerned with how well people speak, especially when they're in front of the convention trying to state their case as to why the United States government should forever be the way they think it is. I've always thought of Madison as a little bit quiet. He was small and skinny. He was like 100 pounds. I always thought of him as quiet, agreeable in conversation, sweet temper. That I understood. But since perhaps because of his association with Thomas Jefferson, who was not a good public speaker, I guess I always thought of him more as quiet. But he does say he cannot be called an orator, but he is a most agreeable, eloquent, and convincing speaker. So, interesting. Mr. Blair. Mr. Blair is one of the most respectable men in Virginia, both on account of his family as well as his fortune. He is one of the judges of the Supreme Court in Virginia and acknowledged to have very extensive knowledge of the laws. Mr. Blair is, however, no orator, but he has good sense and most excellent principles compensate for other deficiencies. He is about 50 years of age. Edmund Randolph. This, he's, as we'll get to, about 32 years old. I think he's actually 34 because Pierce is guessing a lot here. Is about 34 years old and governor of Virginia. He would later be the first secretary of He would later be the first Attorney General for George Washington, a very close friend of Washington, and then take Thomas Jefferson's place as the second Secretary of State. It's a very important young man. Mr. Randolph is governor of Virginia, a young gentleman in whom all let me try again. Mr. Randolph is governor of Virginia, a young gentleman in whom unite all the accomplishments of the scholar and the statesman. He came forward with the postulate or force principles on which the convention acted, and he supported them with a force of eloquence and reasoning that did him great honor. He has a most harmonious voice, a fine person, and striking manners. Now, what he's saying there is Randolph is the one who presents the Virginia plan. We often give James Madison credit as the author of the Constitution or father of the Constitution. And yes, James Madison came up with much of the Virginia plan. Now, first of all, Madison's plan changed much over the 3 months that summer of 1787 when everyone else put their fingers in it. But Madison wasn't the orator. The first thing George Washington did when he sat in the chair as president of the Constitutional Convention, he called his governor, Edmund Randolph, to speak. And Randolph presented Madison's plan, what became known as either the Virginia plan nowadays, or at the time, the Randolph plan. And it's literally the plan that they used the entire time. They changed it a lot. And at one point, New Jersey came in with the New Jersey plan, which was pretty different, but still had a lot of the same stuff in it. And they were compared. The Jersey plan was compared directly to that. So Randolph plays a major role in creating the Constitution. And then, at the end, September 17th, when everyone's signing it, Randolph is there with Mason and Gerry and says, I'm not going to sign that. That's how much it changed over time. Mr. McClurg, I think McClurg leaves before, and I don't think he actually signs the document. And White doesn't either. White leaves early. Many of these people actually leave early for various reasons. Mr. McClurg is a learned physician, but having never appeared before in public life, his character as a politician is not sufficiently known. He attempted once or twice to speak, but with no great success. It is certain that he has a foundation of learning on which, if he pleases, he may erect a character of high renown. The doctor is about 38 years of age, a gentleman of great respectability, and of a fair and unblemished character. I guess saying that and not saying it for other people meant everyone else has blemishes on their character. North Carolina. William Blount, Richard Dobbs Speight, Hugh Williamson, William Davey, and John Alexander Martin. Real quick, no one's real sure if his name was John or Alexander. He usually went by Alexander Martin, but everyone seems to think his first name was John, so that's very interesting. Esquires. This implies they're all lawyers. We'll see. Mr. Blount. Real quick. So Mr. Blount, he was concerned with getting Tennessee to become a state, and he would be after this too. He'd be the first governor of Tennessee, things like that. First senator from Tennessee, I should say. He was territorial governor before it was a state. Blount comes to the Constitutional Convention, and then he leaves and goes to the Continental Congress, where he helps ratify the Northwest Ordinance, and then he comes back to the Constitutional Convention right at the end to sign the document. So he shows up early to get his name on the rolls, doesn't do any work, and comes back and signs the document. I always think that's really funny. Mr. Blount is a character strongly marked for integrity and honor. He has been twice a member of Congress, and in that office discharged his duty with ability and faithfulness. He is no speaker, nor does he possess any of those talents that make men shine. He is plain, honest, and sincere. Mr. Blount is about 36 years of age. This is really interesting because somewhere behind me is one of my favorite books about the Constitutional Convention called Plain, Honest Men. And I am wondering if this is where that title came from. Unfortunately, the author, Richard Beekman, passed away a few years ago, so we'll never know unless I look into it. I'm sure it's somewhere in the book, like in the notes somewhere. Mr. Speight, Richard Dobbs Speight, he'd get in a duel later. Mr. Speight is a worthy man of some abilities and fortune. Without possessing a genius to render him brilliant, he is able to discharge any public trust that his country may repose in him. He is about 31 years of age. Another 30-year-old. Mr. Hugh Williamson. Excuse me. Mr. Williamson is a gentleman of education and talents. He enters freely into public debate from his close attention to most subjects, but he is no orator. There is a great degree of good humor and pleasantry in his character, and in his manners there is a strong trait of the gentleman. He's about 48 years of age. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. Mr. Davey is a lawyer of some eminence in his state. He is said to have a good classical education and is a gentleman of considerable literary talents. He was silent in the convention, but his opinion was always respected. Mr. Davey is about 30 years old. Is there a reason? So it's hard to tell. Pierce doesn't leave any notes about these notes. It seems to have been just a recollection for himself. Now, the founders were aware of posterity. They were very aware that if these letters were saved, they would be read later on. As I said earlier, if he just let these ride and published them or something like that, he would definitely be challenged to a bunch of duels for some of the language he uses in this paper. That being said, he is probably recording for his kids and his posterity and future to know. Like, the weight of the situation was known to the people there. They understood what they were doing. Even if people outside the convention, because of the secrecy rule, didn't know what they were doing. In giving, it seems to me that adding the ages would either help him remember how old they were, or just helps to give some more detail on who they were. You know, because, like, for example, let's see, he says he's playing on, I'm trying to think of a particular one to look at, but you know, saying he's 31 years of age, without possessing genius to make him brilliant, he does render this for his country. So, like, he can look at, like, okay, they might have a future. Like, earlier, one of the first people he said was Elbridge Gerry, who he called one of the great luminaries of the time, at just in his 30s, as opposed to Ben Franklin, who he says is remarkably, what was the word, remarkably coherent for his age. My words, not his. I don't remember exactly what he said. But I think that just the ages help to add to the description and help build the characters he's described. Though I would like to know more. If you find out anything else, let me know. Who are we up? Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin was lately governor of North Carolina, which office he filled with credit. He is a man of sense and undoubtedly a good politician, but he is not formed to shine in public debates, being no speaker. Read that wrong. Mr. Martin was once a colonel in the American Army, but proved unfit for the field. He is about 40 years of age. That's funny. Martin, Alexander Martin? Why was he unfit for the field? I wrote about Martin a while ago. I can't remember why he was unfit. All right, you know what? Actually, they just mean you. I'm going to pull it up. All I'm going to do is go to my own website, type in Martin, of which there are a few, and just see what the headline says and see if that reminds me. Someone popped in and out, of course, right then. Don't worry, Esther. More people are going to watch as we keep doing this. Joseph Martin. Did I not write about Alexander Martin? I remember very specifically. That's how I knew his name was screwed up. Alexander Martin. That's how I knew about his name. I don't know what's going. Maybe I did research and didn't write the article. Yeah, he's under Samuel Finley as someone who went to West Nottingham Academy. And he's like the only one here. That's really weird. Why would I've been writing articles for 3.5 years now, and I guess I don't remember sometimes. You know, in hindsight, I could have looked it up here. Let's do a test run. Founder of the day, Martin. Now, I know that's going to work because I just looked it up, but can you see me doing this? Look at that. Super cool. Should have done that in the first place. Just added a thing. Yeah, Joseph Martin, Adam Stevens. For whatever reason, I guess I could do John Martin? And this is it. And then I'll go back because I'm not going to play around with this all day. Yeah, see, he's like here. That's weird. I must have researched it. Sometimes it happens I research a guy and don't end up writing the article. Sometimes it happens I research a founder and write an article, and it just I'm publishing it, I'm like, wait a minute. And I go back and I've already written about that person. That's the worst. Anyhoozle, let's talk about South Carolina. John Rutledge, Charles Coatsworth Pinkney, Charles Pinkney, and Pierce Butler. Yes, 2 Charles Pinkneys. They were cousins. John Rutledge is probably one of the most important here. He's again another gigantically underrated founder. All the way back in the 1760s, he went to the Stamp Act Congress in New York, all the way from South Carolina, as a 20-something-year-old. And then he would go to the First Continental Congress. He was at the Second Continental Congress, doesn't sign the Declaration of Independence because he runs home to be the first governor of South Carolina. He would be at the Constitutional Convention. He ends up going to... He becomes a judge, one of the initial judges on the Supreme Court, and he would actually be a temporary acting Chief Justice, and he was approved to be the second Chief Justice, or he was nominated to be Chief Justice after John Jay left, but then he talks trash about the Jay Treaty and George Washington, and then he's shamed out of town and tries to kill himself. According to Wikipedia, he resigned for poor health. Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, proved unfit. Okay, so he got sick. So, literally unfit, and not, he sucked at being in the war, which is usually what I take their meaning back then. Let's talk about John Rutledge. Mr. Rutledge. Mr. Rutledge is one of those characters who was highly mounted at the commencement of the late Revolution. His reputation in the first Congress gave him a distinguished rank among the American worthies. He was bred to the law and now acts as one of the chancellors of South Carolina. This gentleman is much famed in his own state as an orator, but in my opinion he is too rapid in his public speaking to be denominated an agreeable orator. He is undoubtedly a man of abilities and a gentleman of distinction and fortune. Mr. Rutledge, once governor of South Carolina, he is about 48 years old. He's a little bit older now, even though he was once one of the young men of the Revolution. Mr. Charles Coatsworth Pinkney is a gentleman of family and fortune in his own state. He has received the advantage of a liberal education and possesses a very extensive degree of legal knowledge. When warm in debate, he sometimes speaks well, but he is generally considered an indifferent orator. Mr. Pinkney was an officer of high rank in the army and served with great reputation throughout the war. He is now about 40 years of age. Not much to comment on there. Mr. Charles Pinkney is a young gentleman of the most promising talents. Although he's only 24 years of age, that's wrong. Does he not sign the Constitution? Charles Pinkney. Let's look it up, Ashley. We're going to figure this out. Because the youngest signer was... 1757 and 87. No, he's 30. He is 30 years old at this point. So, good. I was right. Because Jonathan Dayton was 27 once they sign it. So, he's the youngest. Okay. You just can't always trust a William Pierce, I suppose. Charles Pinkney is a gentleman, promising talents. Although he's only 24 years of age, in possession of a great variety of knowledge. Government, law, history, and philosophy are his favorite studies, but he is intimately acquainted with every species of political learning, and has a high spirit of application and industry beyond most men. He speaks with great neatness and perspicuity, and treats every subject as fully, without running into prolixity, as it requires. Whoa! He has been a member of Congress and served in that body with ability and etc. I think that's etc. Okay, weird. He doesn't give his... Oh, he gives his age up here. Okay, yeah. But he's wrong about it. He's obviously guessing it. Speaking of the ages, like you asked, Ashley. Yeah, weird. So Charles Coatsworth Pinkney would actually run for vice president on the ticket with John Adams. And Alexander Hamilton tried to get him to become the candidate over Adams within the Federalist Party. He basically tried to it's like it's like I'll go back a few years to make it right. It's like if Barack Obama was running for his second term as president, and Nancy Pelosi got Hillary Clinton to be the nominee instead of Barack Obama, is essentially what Hamilton tried to do to Adams. It's one thing that made Adams so mad to fire all the boys that were working with Hamilton under his command. Charles Coatsworth Pinkney ran with him. He would also, I believe he was part of the XYZ affair also. And then his brother, Thomas Pinkney, runs for president essentially against Thomas Jefferson. The second time. Was Pinkney aware of that? You know what's funny? I don't know if Pinkney was actually aware of it. I don't believe so, because he does work with John Adams. Oh, no, he doesn't, because they lose. That's right. They lose the election of 1800. But we hear all this, like in the play Hamilton. We hear about the election of 1800, and Burr and Jefferson are on the same ticket and tie. Adams and Pinkney were on the same ticket and lost. Largely because people were voting for Pinkney instead of Adams, basically. The idea was that Pinkney was a Southerner and a Federalist, and there weren't a lot of Southern Federalists, but people who were not necessarily thrilled with Thomas Jefferson might move over and vote for Pinkney instead. Didn't work. But then, in the election of 1804, his brother Thomas Pinkney runs the Federalist candidate, and then again in 1808 against James Madison. So the Pinkney brothers run for either VP or president for 3 consecutive elections, losing every time. And then they were replaced by Rufus King, who we mentioned yesterday. I don't think Pinkney was aware of it, because John Adams was going through the North at that point. He was like going to Rhode Island. I stumbled onto this story when I was writing about, I think it was Collins, one of the governors of Rhode Island, who was an elector and was approached by Hamilton and wrote a letter and had it published. So Pinkney becomes aware of it because it gets published. Everyone becomes aware of it because it gets published. But I don't think he played a role in that. Mr. Charles Pinkney. So that was Charles Coatsworth. Oh, okay, yeah. That was Charles Coatsworth. This is his cousin Charles Pinkney. He doesn't do much after that. Mr. Butler. Mr. Butler is a character of much respect for the many excellent virtues which he possesses. But as a politician or an orator, he has no pretensions to either. He is a gentleman of fortune and takes rank among the first in South Carolina. He has been appointed to Congress and is now a member of the legislature of South Carolina. Mr. Butler is about 40 years old, an Irishman by birth. Look at that. So, yeah, Butler came over from Ireland and made a name for himself. Butler, we talked about a few weeks ago. He's the one who pushes for slaves to be counted as people for exactly the wrong reasons. He ends up being one of the largest slave owners in the country. He's the one who puts in the fugitive slave clause. He's, I mean, I'll be honest, most of South Carolina is pushing for the, what we historically now look back on as horrible decisions when it comes to slavery. Butler's kind of the leader in that. It's unfortunate. He also owns just a ton of slaves, to the point where his grandkids, one of his grandkids inherits most of his estate and then runs up gambling debts and has to sell his estate in 1859, I believe it is known as the Weeping Time in many communities, or the Great Slave Auction, where it was about 500 people were auctioned off in one auction, and just families were split up and put all over the country. It's a bummer. It's a bummer, but I have to point it out. I feel wrong not pointing it out. That is, a few years before the Civil War. It's really outside the purview of our discussion here, but still an important part of the conversation to bring up. And Georgia, we are at the last part. I will say, Mr. Butler is Pierce Butler, and these papers written by William Pierce, so they share a name kind of. We have William Few, Abraham Baldwin, William Pierce, and William William Houston Esquires. Three Williams. 3 out of 4 Georgia delegates are a William. Look at that. Mr. Few possesses a strong... Now, these are people from his own state, so he probably knows these people better. So keep that in mind while we're reading through this. Mr. Few possesses a strong natural genius and from application has acquired some knowledge of legal matters. He practices at the bar of Georgia and speaks tolerably well when in the legislature. He has been twice a member of Congress and served in that capacity with fidelity to his state and honor to himself. Mr. Few is about 35 years old. Mr. Baldwin. Mr. Baldwin is a gentleman of superior abilities and joins in a public debate with great art and eloquence. Having laid the foundation of a complete classical education at Harvard College, he pursues every other study with ease. He is well acquainted with books and characters and has an accommodating turn of mind, which enables him to gain the confidence of men and to understand them. He is a practicing attorney in Georgia and has been twice a member of Congress. Mr. Baldwin is about 38 years of age. Interesting. It's interesting he went to Harvard. I don't remember a lot about Baldwin's history, but a huge part of Georgia was, especially Revolutionary Georgia, were displaced Yankees, essentially. There were many enclaves of New Englanders. I'll remind you, Georgia was first created as a colony in 1735, so 40 years before Lexington and Concord and 52 years before this happened. So some of the people running Georgia are literally first-generation Georgians, and on top of that, some of them are the children of immigrants. Like, I guess that's what first-generation means. But some of them, their children are first-generation Georgians. But because of that, Georgia was a new colony. It was a new place. So people from other colonies relocated there seeking opportunity they might not have at home. Where it was a little more populated. If you were a young lawyer in Connecticut, there were a lot of lawyers in Connecticut at this point, and there were no one doing anything in Georgia. So he went to Harvard, which makes me think he probably was born up north. Anyway, Mr. Houston is an attorney at law and has been a member of Congress for the state of Georgia. He is a gentleman of family and was educated in England. As to his legal or political knowledge, he has very little to boast of. Nature seems to have done more for his corporal than mental powers. His person is striking, but his mind is very little improved with useful or elegant knowledge. He has none of the talents requisite for an orator, but in public debate is confused and irregular. Mr. Houston is about 30 years of age, of an amiable and sweet temper, and of good, honorable principles. I think he throws this in case someone reads it so he doesn't get in a duel. Again, right after reading this, Pierce goes to New York for a duel. Not necessarily the nicest guy in the world. As for Houston, he ends up becoming governor of Georgia, despite Pierce's discussion here. And I believe he did fight in the war, because the person of striking... when he says corporal more than knowledgeable powers, or how do you say corporal more than mental powers? He's a big, strong dude, which is impressive. And this is fun. Let's see how he ends it. My own character, William Pierce, talking about himself after talking trash about pretty much all of the rest of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention. My own character I shall not attempt to draw, but leave those my own character I shall not attempt to draw, but leave those who may choose to speculate on it to consider it in any light that their fancy or imagination may depict. I am conscious of having discharged my duty as a soldier through the course of the late Revolution with honor and propriety, and my services in the Congress and the Convention were bestowed with the best intentions toward the interest of Georgia and towards the general welfare of the Confederacy. I possess ambition, and it was that and the flattering opinion which some of my friends had of me that gave me a seat in the wisest council in the world, and furnished me with an opportunity of giving these short sketches of the characters who composed it. That's nice. It's pretty nice. Interesting. I feel like this reflects on what you were asking earlier, Ashley. What we were talking about earlier. But leave to those who may choose to speculate on it. It means he did think people would read this. Now, he might not have expected to publish it. In fact, I'm actually a little curious if it ever was published. In hindsight, do they have notes up here? No. Interesting. Interesting. I'm not sure if it was published in his lifetime or not. I should have looked that up before we did this, but I'm being honest. But that's that. Again, he got in a lot of duels. He does mention that he fought in the war as a soldier, which he did. He was an aide-de-camp first to General Sullivan in Rhode Island, which wasn't great, and then to Benjamin Nathaniel Greene, who really kind of won the war in the South. So he does have that. And that, my friends, mostly Ashley, you've been the one watching the whole time. I'm sure as we do this more, first of all, people are fatigued from the last thing I did. Probably won't do 2 in a night. very frequently. But I was just really excited that we started it and you guys liked it yesterday, so I ran with it. I'll put myself bigger. Yeah, well, that's true. Like I said, with posterity, they all saved their notes. They did expect much of this to be read later on by other people. Us, quite literally, the reason the American founders saved so much of their letters was for us. They speak about posterity all the time. So, thank you, William Pierce, for being kind of a dick with some of these. I don't know if you noticed. William Pierce was not very nice to some of his colleagues in those sketches. Could have been, like I said, I feel like he would have got put in a duel if he published that, but he didn't. Good for him. With that, I am going to go. Forever literally just popped in. You missed it. It was a lot of fun, and I apologize. We're 40 minutes into this. Just did a 45-minute video before that. A lot of fun. If you guys have anything you'd like me to read, recommendations, I haven't done it yet, but there's a link to the Discord down below here. I'm going to add another channel on the Discord page to where you guys can make recommendations. Yeah, this was a fun one. I thought this would be a fun place to start. Guys, let me know what you like to do. Like, we can go back and read through the Federal Farmers, some of the early publications leading up to the Revolution. We can go back and read Poor Richard's Almanac. I just thought of that. That might be a lot of fun. There's like 32 years of them though, so we're not going to read all of them, but we could pop through and see like some of Ben Franklin's like silly articles and stuff. You know what we might, maybe we could do? One of Ben Franklin's first articles, when he published it as Poor Richard, there was already someone else publishing almanacs. So he publishes, let's see if I remember this right. He publishes his first article saying that his competitor has died. And then that guy is like, no, I didn't. And it becomes this kind of like back and forth in the papers. He like accuses him of being being an imposter because that guy died. Oh, you're saying you're not dead, but you can't be him because he's dead. So maybe we go back and read some of those. Whatever you want, like let me know. We'd love to do it. We could also read letters between people, help learn about different people. So thank you guys for coming. Don't have a sign off for this quite yet. We will come up with one though. I guess at this point I'll just make them up each time. So I'll just be like, lots of fun, grade A, good times. No, that's not a good one. We'll come up with some. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will be back. Tomorrow there will be trivia at night. Also, my daily videos. I don't know if you guys who watch live actually get my daily videos, but I do publish really brief ones about each founder every morning. So if you're interested in getting a head start on the weekly wrap up, that's where you can do that. I'm gonna go. Thank you guys so much, and I'll be back tomorrow.